World.
This is BBC World.
Bomb disposal experts carry out a controlled explosion outside the BBC's television centre in London. The BBC's television newsroom is evacuated after the police carry out a major anti-terrorism operation. In other news, there are fears that foot-and-mouth disease may have reached mainland Europe. Welcome to BBC News. I'm Susan Osman at the BBC's Westminster studios. We're broadcasting from here for the time being because of that explosion that you just saw outside our main news centre in West London. Well, bomb disposal officers have carried out a controlled explosion on a suspicious vehicle thought to be a taxi outside BBC Television Centre in West London. At around 12:30 a.m. there was an explosion at the front of the building. The front of Television Centre had been evacuated and broadcasting continued throughout. BBC staff inside the building heard the bomb go off. There are no reports of any injuries. The Metropolitan Police received a coded warning saying there was an explosive device at the front of BBC Television Centre at around 11:30 p.m. One nearby resident reported hearing several loud bangs, one of which blew a glass lampshade off his living room wall. Officers from the police's anti-terrorist branch are at the scene. Well, I'm joined now by Laurie Margolis from BBC Television Centre, who's our correspondent, who I believe you saw everything, didn't you, Laurie?
I did, Susan. We were about 200 yards away on the roof of a building, cameraman John Brotherton and myself. We were there for about half an hour. There was a slow build-up of police activity. The bomb disposal Land Rover turned up, and the robot that you can now see in the pictures went up to the London taxi, which was the object of their attentions. At about 12:15, we think they fired a round into the taxi, either to break the windows or to open the door. That sounded like if you like, a car backfiring at some distance. Then at 12:27, the explosion, which you've already shown a couple of times, happened. If the police say it was controlled, I have no immediate reason to disagree with them. I've got to say it didn't seem controlled. It seemed to go off. It was a heck of a bang. I've seen similar ones in Northern Ireland. It's hard to compare bombs with bombs. I wouldn't have said it was a massive explosion in terms of the amount of explosive there, but nevertheless it was a substantial bang. We could feel the impact of it 200 or 300 yards away, and the fire that you're seeing presumably was the fuel tank going up. As far as we know, there is not much damage inside the BBC newsroom, which faces the scene you're looking at there. We think there's a window knocked out, not much other damage, although we are not allowed in there and won't be for some time. And many vehicles on the road outside also will have been quite badly damaged, I think.
What have the police said about this, Laurie?
Well, not much so far. They said there was a coded warning, a recognised code word, which certainly caused them to get us to evacuate the building about half an hour, 45 minutes before this happened. And since then, as I say, they claim the explosion was as a result of a controlled explosion. Now, what that would mean is that the robot that you can see fired something into the taxi and made this thing blow up. Now, whether it was controlled in the sense that it blew up when they intended to blow it up, or whether it went up of its own volition, as it were, we can't really say yet.
When did you first realise that there was going to be this evacuation from the BBC?
We had an emergency call. There's a well-rehearsed procedure here for this sort of thing. It is rehearsed quite often. And we were told to leave the part of the building which faces onto Wood Lane, onto the road you can see there. People will move back into the innards of the complex, as it were. It's a very large area that the BBC Television Centre covers. And as I say, the cameraman and myself went to what we considered a relatively safe spot with a view of the scene, and shot what you have been showing several times.
Laurie Margolis, thanks so much for joining us. Well, I'm joined now by Andrew Clark, who was actually inside the building at the time. What did you hear when you were inside, Andrew?
Well, what happened was it was about 12:30, and the
the room shook, there was a large bang. There was some panic. There were about 30 members of staff, I would say, inside the newsroom at the time, and we were told to evacuate, to leave the building as quickly as possible, and we did so. We moved, and obviously we've come here to report the events.
Now, Laura was talking about procedures. When did you know that it was actually quite a serious situation?
I think it became clear to us all when we were told to leave the main part of the building. If you're looking at the pictures now, you can see that where we normally work from as journalists is actually at the front of the building, obviously only a few yards away from where the explosion actually took place. We were then moved to another part of the building, at the back of the building, but you know, so we were probably a little further away, but we could still feel the impact of the explosion.
I understand some people heard the explosion up to 7 miles away, is that right?
That's right, yes. I mean, we have some eyewitnesses, some people on Uxbridge Road, which is probably, well, certainly at least half a mile, if not a mile away, it depends how far along the road, where the houses shook with the force of the blast.
Now, Laurie said he couldn't, it was too early to say whether it was controlled or not, that the police actually haven't responded, or what do you know about this? Have they said any more about
according
motives?
to the latest information that's come in, there was apparently a coded warning which was given to Scotland Yard, and that's why they took this action. But they are not, or they're refusing to give any more information for the time being.
Andrew Clark, thanks so much for joining us for the time being. Well, of course, we will keep you up to date on that story as we get more information. Other news now, though. Despite stringent protection measures, there are fears that foot-and-mouth disease may have spread from the UK to mainland Europe. A pig farm at Digsmude, Belgium, is the site of the first suspected case. Although initial tests have proved negative, all livestock exports have been banned from the country. And in France, the disease is suspected at a sheep farm at Roche-la-Molière. In the UK, the number of confirmed cases has grown to over 50.
Apparently fired a round into the vehicle, a suspect taxi. The vehicle then exploded, indicating, according to the person that we have spoken to, that it is likely to be a bomb. But at this stage, the investigation is completely open. There's no suggestion of any other suspicious involvement. But that is what we've heard from a BBC correspondent. Moving on now, there's been more evidence of the human tragedies suffered as a result of the Selby rail disaster. The two young sons of the freight train driver have been taken to the scene where they're...
News, Bangkok.
You're watching BBC News. I'm Susan Osman. We're broadcasting from our Westminster studios because of a controlled explosion earlier outside Television Centre in West London. Bomb disposal officers have arrived and...
So I don't think there would have been anybody in any vulnerable position. Wood Lane, which is a fairly busy road, although of course this was very early in the morning, so there wasn't that much traffic. Wood Lane was sealed off at both ends. No traffic was within 200 or 300 yards. The police were keeping what few pedestrians there were well out of the way. The police who were on patrol outside were really quite jumpy when they saw us. They shrieked at us to get out of the way, which we did relatively quickly.
Laurie Margolis, thanks so much for joining us. Well, you are watching the BBC. My name is Susan Osman. We're broadcasting from the Westminster studios. We heard from Laurie Margolis and we saw the pictures there. A controlled explosion took place outside the BBC television studios in West London just after 12:30. Some said they heard the blast from 7 miles away. We'll have more on that, plus other news a little later on. You're watching the BBC News.
Hello again. We're going ahead to South Asia now, where over the last couple of days we've seen one or two thunderstorms across some northern plains.